1960, Chicago. A smoke-filled room in the Ambassador East Hotel. Sam Giancana sat in the corner booth, the boss of the Chicago outfit, the man who controlled unions, casinos, politicians. And across from him, nervous but trying not to show it, sat Frank Sinatra. The conversation, according to those who claimed to know what was discussed, was simple. John F. Kennedy needed to win Illinois. The primary in West Virginia was coming. Without those states, Kennedy's path to the presidency was blocked. Giancana took a long pull from his bourbon. Ice clinked in the glass. The silence stretched. Then he spoke, and witnesses later recalled the words carried the weight of a deal that would change American history. "What's in it for me, Frank?" What Sinatra answered, what the mob delivered, and what Kennedy promised in return would become one of the most explosive secrets in American political history. A deal that put a president in the White House. A deal that would destroy Sinatra's friendship with that president 2 years later. A deal that the FBI documented but could never quite prove. This is the story of how the chairman tried to play kingmaker, and how that decision would haunt him for the rest of his life. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video for your support. Thank you for subscribing. But to understand how Frank Sinatra ended up negotiating with the Chicago mob on behalf of a presidential candidate, you have to go back to the beginning. To 1958, when Sinatra first met Sam Giancana, when the two most dangerous men in America became friends. Sinatra was 43 in 1958. The comeback was complete. Oscar winner, Capitol record sensation, Rat Pack forming. Vegas was his kingdom. He'd clawed back from the Hampshire House bathtub, from the Ava collapse, from career death. Now he was the chairman of the board, untouchable. Or so he thought. Cal-Neva Lodge sat on the California-Nevada border at Lake Tahoe. Sinatra had bought a stake in the casino in 1960. Beautiful property, high rollers, Hollywood crowd, perfect investment for a man building an empire. But there was a problem. A silent partner. Sam "Momo" Giancana. Giancana ran the Chicago outfit, controlled the Teamsters Union, had his hands in casinos from Vegas to Havana. Murders, extortion, loan sharking. The FBI had a file on him 3 feet thick. And Nevada gaming law was crystal clear. Known mobsters couldn't hold casino licenses, not even hidden ones. Sinatra knew this. He wasn't naive. He'd grown up around mob guys in Hoboken. Willie Moretti had helped his early career. Frank Costello had smoothed paths. Lucky Luciano had been at his wedding. The mob and Sinatra had history stretching back to the 1940s. But Giancana was different. More dangerous. More violent. More powerful. The man had allegedly ordered hundreds of murders. The FBI called him one of the 10 most wanted men in America. And Sinatra, knowingly or not, had just become his business partner. The friendship that developed was complex. Sinatra needed mob connections for Cal-Neva to operate smoothly. Giancana needed Sinatra's legitimacy, his Hollywood access, his cultural power. They met at Sinatra's Palm Springs compound, at restaurants in Chicago, at Cal-Neva itself, where Giancana stayed in Chalet 50, hidden from prying eyes. Those who saw them together noted the dynamic. Sinatra would defer to Giancana in ways he deferred to no one else. The chairman became almost respectful, quiet, listening. Because both men understood the truth. Giancana had power Sinatra couldn't touch. The power of violence, the power of fear, the power that came from controlling things that stayed in shadows. And then, in early 1960, opportunity knocked. John F. Kennedy was running for president. Kennedy and Sinatra had met through Peter Lawford, who'd married Patricia Kennedy, JFK's sister. The friendship was genuine at first. Kennedy loved Hollywood glamour. Sinatra loved political power. They partied together in Palm Springs. Sinatra introduced Kennedy to women. Kennedy made Sinatra feel like he belonged in the corridors of power. But Kennedy had a problem. He was Catholic, young, unproven. The Democratic primary was brutal. He needed money. He needed organization. He needed votes in key states like Illinois and West Virginia, states with powerful unions, states where the mob had influence. And Sinatra, the chairman, the bridge between worlds, saw an opportunity. Help Kennedy win, become a kingmaker, prove that a kid from Hoboken could put a president in the White House. So Sinatra made a call to Chicago, to Sam Giancana. The meeting in the Ambassador East Hotel happened in early 1960, according to accounts that surfaced years later. Sinatra flew to Chicago, went to Giancana's territory. The reversal of power was notable. The chairman coming to ask a favor. The conversation, as later pieced together by FBI informants and witnesses, was straightforward. Sinatra reportedly explained that Kennedy needed help. West Virginia primary first. A poor state, union-heavy, mob-influenced. Then Illinois in the general election. Chicago vote could swing the entire state. Giancana listened. He was a businessman. Everything was a transaction. And according to those accounts, his question was logical. What do I get? The answer, reportedly conveyed through Sinatra, was implied rather than explicit. A Kennedy administration would be understanding. The aggressive investigations into organized crime would ease. The heat would back off. Bobby Kennedy, JFK's brother and campaign manager, wouldn't come after the outfit the way Eisenhower's Justice Department had. It was a deal. Unspoken, deniable, but a deal. What happened next has been debated by historians for decades, but the facts are these. West Virginia primary, May 1960. Kennedy was losing in polls. The state was Protestant, hostile to Catholics. His opponent, Hubert Humphrey, was the favorite. Then money flooded in. Lots of money. Union support materialized overnight. Local bosses suddenly backed Kennedy. On primary day, Kennedy won by a landslide, 60% to 40%. The upset shocked political experts. Years later, people who claimed involvement would say the Chicago outfit poured money into West Virginia. Through unions, through payoffs to local politicians, through Sinatra's entertainment connections, providing cover for cash transfers. Whether Kennedy knew the source of that help remained permanently unclear. But Kennedy won West Virginia, and the nomination became inevitable. Then came the general election. November 1960, Kennedy versus Nixon. The race was razor thin. Everything came down to a few key states: Texas, California, and Illinois. Illinois was the crown jewel. If Kennedy won Illinois, he likely won the presidency. And Illinois came down to Chicago, Cook County, Mayor Richard Daley's machine, Sam Giancana's territory. Election night, November 8, 1960, the results were agonizingly close. Nixon led in downstate Illinois, the rural Republican counties. Kennedy needed Chicago to deliver. Massively. The votes came in late. Very late. Suspiciously late. Chicago precincts reported hours after the rest of the state, and when the numbers finally arrived, they were overwhelming. Kennedy won Cook County by 450,000 votes. Illinois went for Kennedy by less than 9,000 votes statewide. 450,000 in Cook County, 9,000 statewide. The math told a story. Nixon's people screamed fraud. Republicans demanded recounts. Stories emerged of dead people voting, of precincts where more ballots were cast than registered voters existed. of outfit-controlled wards delivering impossible margins. According to accounts from people who claimed to be close to Giancana, the mob boss was blunt about his role. He later reportedly said words to the effect, "That election was ours. We delivered Chicago. We put Kennedy in the White House." Whether Sinatra knew the extent of what happened remained murky, but the FBI knew. They'd been watching, photographing, recording. Their files documented Sinatra's meetings with Giancana, his calls to Chicago, his trips to Cal-Neva where Giancana stayed. The FBI file on Sinatra grew thicker. The Eisenhower administration, outgoing, suspicious, passed everything to the incoming Kennedy team, including one message: "Your friend Frank Sinatra is in business with Sam Giancana. The mob helped you win, and they're going to want payback." Kennedy's inauguration was January 20th, 1961. Sinatra organized the inaugural gala, a star-studded event that raised money and celebrated the new administration. Sinatra stood on that stage, introducing performers, basking in the glow. He'd done it. The kid from Hoboken had helped elect a president, but behind the scenes, trouble was brewing. Bobby Kennedy had been appointed Attorney General, and Bobby had a very different view of organized crime than the one implied in those Chicago meetings. Bobby saw the mob as a cancer, and he intended to cut it out. Aggressively. Within months of taking office, Bobby Kennedy's Justice Department launched the most aggressive anti-mob campaign in American history. Indictments, deportations, investigations, and at the top of the target list, Sam Giancana and the Chicago outfit. Giancana was furious. According to FBI surveillance and informants, he felt betrayed. The deal, as he understood it, was heat off in exchange for delivering the election. Instead, Bobby Kennedy was bringing more heat than ever. And Giancana blamed Sinatra. The calls started. Angry calls. Threatening calls. According to accounts, Giancana reportedly said to Sinatra, "You told me this administration would back off. Instead, they're coming after me harder than ever. Fix this, Frank, or we're going to have a problem." Sinatra tried. He called Peter Lawford, called people in the Kennedy orbit, tried to get messages to JFK himself, tried to explain that the mob was unhappy, that promises, implied or explicit, hadn't been kept, that there would be consequences. But the Kennedy brothers weren't listening. Bobby was on a crusade, and JFK wasn't going to stop his brother for Frank Sinatra. Not when the FBI had documented Sinatra's mob connections. Not when keeping Sinatra close was becoming a political liability. The breaking point came in March 1962, the Palm Springs betrayal. JFK was scheduled to stay at Sinatra's compound. Sinatra had built a helipad, $100,000 of concrete poured for presidential helicopters. Then Peter Lawford called with the news. Kennedy wasn't coming. Security concerns. FBI warnings about Giancana. The president was staying at Bing Crosby's house instead. Sinatra destroyed the helipad with a sledgehammer, but the message was clear. The friendship was over. The political alliance was dead. And Sinatra, the chairman who'd tried to bridge legitimate and illegitimate power, was left with neither. The mob was furious. They'd delivered an election and gotten nothing but intensified investigations. The Kennedys were furious. They felt Sinatra had dragged mob connections into their administration, and Sinatra was stuck in the middle, blamed by both sides for a deal that fell apart. The FBI wasn't done. In 1963, they raided Cal-Neva Lodge. Agents documented Giancana's presence, photographed him in Chalet 50, proved the illegal partnership. Nevada gaming authorities demanded answers. Sinatra had a choice: testify about his relationship with Giancana, or lose his gaming license. The chairman chose silence. He gave up his Nevada gaming license rather than testify. Cal-Neva was sold. The empire contracted, but the damage went deeper. The FBI file on Sinatra now definitively linked him to mob election interference. The documentation showed meetings in Chicago, calls to Giancana, the Cal-Neva partnership. Everything was recorded, photographed, filed. For the rest of his life, that file would follow Sinatra. Every background check, every security clearance. Every time he got close to political power, the file would resurface. The evidence that Frank Sinatra had helped the mob help Kennedy. And from that moment on, Sinatra's relationship with both the mob and the Kennedys was permanently poisoned. Giancana would later claim, to anyone who'd listen, that the mob was owed, that they'd stolen an election and gotten betrayed, that Kennedy owed his presidency to Chicago, and Chicago didn't forget debts. Whether it was true remained forever contested. Historians debate the Illinois results. Some argue fraud was rampant. Others claim Kennedy would have won anyway. The truth drowned in decades of speculation, conspiracy theories, and political spin. But the FBI believed it. The documentation was extensive. Meetings between Sinatra and Giancana before the election. Money transfers through unions and entertainment fronts. The suspicious vote totals in Cook County. The timeline that connected every piece. What no one could definitively prove was Kennedy's personal knowledge. Did JFK know Sinatra was negotiating with the mob? Did he authorize the approach? Or did Sinatra operate independently, thinking he was helping a friend? The answer died with the men involved. Kennedy was assassinated in November 1963, 3 years after that election. Giancana was murdered in 1975, shot in the back of the head in his own basement, hours before he was supposed to testify before Congress about CIA mob plots. The secrets died with bullets. Sinatra lived another 35 years, but he never spoke publicly about what happened in 1960, never confirmed or denied the mob's role, never explained what he'd said to Giancana in that Chicago meeting. The silence was absolute. Friends who knew both men, who heard whispers, saw documents, pieced together the story, would later say Sinatra's involvement was genuine but naive. He thought he was helping a friend become president. He didn't fully grasp that he was facilitating a transaction between organized crime and American politics. Or maybe he did, and convinced himself the ends justified the means. Either way, the consequences were brutal. The friendship with Kennedy destroyed, the mob alliance soured, the FBI file permanent, and the question that would haunt historians forever. Did the mob steal the 1960 election for JFK? And if they did, was Frank Sinatra the middleman? And from that 1960 election on, Frank Sinatra learned a hard truth about power. Real power, the kind that elects presidents, doesn't share. You can be useful, you can be a tool, but you're never a partner, never an equal. The kid from Hoboken could throw the party, arrange the meeting, make the call. But when the bill came due and the heat turned up, he was expendable. The Kennedys expelled him to protect themselves. The mob blamed him for promises not kept. And Sinatra, the chairman who'd commanded Vegas and Hollywood, discovered he'd never actually controlled anything. He'd been used by both sides. A bridge that both sides walked over, then burned. Some men learn their place and accept it. Sinatra learned his place and never forgave anyone who'd put him there. Not the Kennedys, not the mob, not the FBI who documented everything. The rage that had always lived inside him, The rage that smashed phones and punched photographers found a new target. The system that used him then discarded him. He rebuilt, always rebuilt. But the lesson remained. In the world of real power, political power, life and death power, Sinatra was still just the entertainment. Useful, expendable, never essential. The 1960 election became legend. Historians still debate. Conspiracy theorists still obsess. But the men who knew the truth, Sinatra, Giancana, the Kennedys, took their secrets to the grave. What remains is evidence: FBI files, photographs, documented meetings, suspicious vote totals, and the inescapable fact that Frank Sinatra, at age 44, tried to bridge two worlds that could never coexist. Tried to be both cultural icon and political power broker. Tried to serve both Kennedy and the mob, and ended up trusted by neither. Used by both. Stuck with a permanent FBI file that said, Frank Sinatra helped organized crime influence an American presidential election. Whether he meant to, whether he knew the full extent, whether history would judge him as naive or complicit, none of that mattered. The file existed, the connection was documented, the American icon was permanently the FBI target. That was the paradox that defined Sinatra's life. And the 1960 election was the moment when that paradox became permanent. When the chairman learned he was never really in charge. When the bridge between worlds collapsed. When Frank Sinatra discovered that power, real power, always exacts a price, and he paid it for the rest of his life.